It is just before 9 o'clock, and in about an hour, we'll be going on air with the exit poll. If everything goes as Labour desperately hopes it to, we're going to have the first change in government for 14 years. That's so massive.
The exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
We did it!
It was all I could do not to just burst into tears of joy and relief.
Since that dramatic night, we've been behind the scenes with the brand new government.
Foreign Secretary, you used to be called that yet?
I think so.
Already, decisions are piling up.
Are you prepared to be unpopular?
Doing nothing is also deeply unpopular.
In government, life comes at you fast.
I was contacted minutes after those shots were fired on Donald Trump.
Keir Starmer is promising to change Britain at a time when voters are losing trust in politics.
Unless we deliver, people will lose hope and they will turn to the siren voices of populism.
Labour is back in power. Now comes the hard part. The morning after the night before.
In Labour HQ, people will be crying with joy, exhausted, elated, hugging each other, pinching themselves. But there is nothing easy about what lies in wait for them. Nothing at all.
The economy and public services have been battered. It's an ugly inheritance for Labour, however much homework they've done.
I think they believe they're as ready as they could possibly ever be. Is that the same of understanding what it's really going to be like? Oh, a bit of it. But it's going to be the opposite of a picnic. And they know that. They know it.
He can smile because they won, just 5 years after being hammered by the Conservatives. So many voters these days are willing to switch their tribe.
Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. The world is now a more volatile place. This will take a while. Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
The first task, to choose who'll be by his side. Some have come a long way, like the new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy.
I was thinking of my parents, and I so wish that they could have been here to see this. We didn't have a lot of money. My eldest son has said to me, "Dad, please don't cry. Don't cry as you walk through the door of number 10. You cannot cry on television. It embarrassed me with all my friends." So I had a big smile on my face, but behind it, I was feeling quite emotional.
Monday morning, and the first ever woman to be Chancellor has been working all weekend. There's nothing glamorous about the hard graft.
Well, I've been in the role now for almost 72 hours, and it's been very, very full on. I think the most special moment, I think, for me so far was when I walked into the building. And then making that first speech in the sort of atrium of the Treasury.
It is also a huge privilege to be the first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. So every young woman and girl...
It was really emotional, especially to look around the room and see, some of the women who have worked here often for long periods of time, but some also just at the start of their careers.
So much of the government's success or failure depends on her, with no guarantee the economy will grow convincingly.
We've been in opposition for 14 years. We haven't got any time to waste. We want to crack on and start delivering all the things that we've been campaigning on. So today is the first down payment on that, in a way, with some of the first steps we're going to take to grow the economy.
She wants you to believe the job is even harder than she thought, using her first big speech to make that public claim.
I have repeatedly warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of circumstances since the Second World War. What I have seen in the past 72 hours has only confirmed that.
As soon as new ministers arrived in their offices, they started telling us, do you know what, it's worse than we thought. And maybe part of that is genuine, but there's an awful lot of expectation management going on too. So they can say to the public, look, we promised you we'd change things, but maybe it's going to be even harder than we thought.
Also heading into a new job, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting.
Definitely find it weird turning on the news bulletins in the morning and hearing references to, you know, the Prime Minister today, the Chancellor today, the Home Secretary today, and thinking, oh, those are our people.
He too's straight out of the blocks to paint a bleak picture.
This government will be honest about the challenges facing our country and serious about tackling them. From today, the policy of this department is that the NHS is broken. I've sort of felt like walking in the last week, thinking about the NHS as a house for a moment. I feel like I'm now peeling back the carpets, looking at the floorboards and the foundations and thinking, this thing is going to fall in.
But are you really, though, surprised by what you've found? Aren't you actually trying to set the public's expectations and pointing the blame for things that are really bad at the other guys who went before?
I don't think we need to do that. I think the public expectations are already realistic. And frankly, I don't think we would have won the election if we'd gone into it saying, don't worry, guys, we've got a Labour magic wand, we're going to wave and everything's going to be hunky-dory within, you know, the first year. People know that change takes time.
The big problem with all of it, there just isn't that much cash. So Rachel Reeves wants to get the economy growing so she can pay for health and other public services. Building houses is top of the to-do list.
This new government are committed to build 1.5 million homes over 5 years, so there's going to be plenty of demand for your skills.
House building is really important for the economy. Building houses in areas of the country that are doing well economically will help growth in the long run. But it's not going to make a big difference quickly. It will make a really important difference over a long period of time.
Angela Rayner is the Deputy Prime Minister. She has to make it happen and desperately wants it done.
So you've got to build me 1.5 million homes, yeah? Yeah. You're on it?
We will try, we'll do our best.
Yeah.
Just make sure you give us some money.
Anyway, that's Rachel, you need to speak to her.
She's the money bags.
She's the money bags, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's from Leeds, so she's a bit tight-fisted, so you have to really convince her as well, yeah. Yeah.
Angela Rayner, your colleague, told us when we were filming with some builders that you were the money bags, but you could be a bit tight-fisted. Is she right?
Well, I'm a Yorkshire MP. We have a reputation in Yorkshire of being good with money, and I'm determined to make sure that the sums always add up.
Are you tight-fisted?
I think I'm sensible.
The new Chancellor knows Labour will face resistance. So she's promising to change the planning rules so Britain can get building.
Governments have wanted to do this for a long time, and in the end, local communities have frustrated all of those things. If this were easy, it would have been done by now. So they're going to have a lot of political strength and commitment, and it will require them to tough out some really difficult political challenges.
We have a mandate for it. We said during the election campaign we are seeking a mandate to grow the economy. We have that mandate. The British people have spoken. They want things to be different. They want a government that's willing to make tough choices and difficult decisions, and this is that government.
But are you prepared to be unpopular?
I recognise that making planning decisions, they might not always be popular, but doing nothing is also deeply unpopular because it bakes in the status quo, and the status quo is not working in Britain.
The new Prime Minister even says he's willing to make enemies. And he's made some new, unusual friends.
Did you get in touch with Stockton about the Riverside stuff?
Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchen is one of the most powerful Tories left standing. He's already had a one-to-one meeting with Keir Starmer.
We've never met each other before. The feeling I took away from that meeting is that Keir Starmer is a man who, I think, over the weekend of the election, is very comfortable in his own skin. I think he's realised he's got a whacking 170, 180 seat majority, and he's willing to use it to do some very big, but potentially some quite contentious things in the face of his own MPs and his own party. Now, it's a big ask, and it's to be seen whether they can do it. But if they don't, then this government is going to be left with some very hard choices. And it's hard choices that ultimately they will have to own because they have pinned all of their hopes on growth.
Then, shocking news from the United States in the middle of the night. This was not in Labour's careful script.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
I was contacted minutes after those shots were fired on Donald Trump. In those first few minutes, you don't know what the outcome of that assassination attempt is.
On you! Ready? Move! Up, move! Go!
You know, I was thinking back to when shots were fired on the White House at Obama. I was thinking back to Reagan being shot. Of course, the Kennedy brothers. Was very disturbing.
In the hours that followed, the favourite for the White House received a phone call from the new Prime Minister. The former president is a million miles from being a natural ally of the new Labour government.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here.
But how could their relationship work if, back in the White House, Donald Trump pulled support from Ukraine, as he's threatened, when the government here is trying everything possible to stand alongside them?
What would happen if President Trump gets back to the White House and he does pull back in his commitment to Ukraine? What would the UK do in those circumstances?
Look, I think with Trump, it's really important to step back a little bit from the rhetoric and the noise. Even in office, he actually committed more troops to European defence. He committed more funds to European defence. And despite his rhetoric on Ukraine, he gave Ukraine the first weapons after they were attacked in 2014. The truth is, when I speak to Republicans, there are isolationist Republicans, but there are lots of voices.
And the language the Foreign Secretary used to use about him? A sociopath and a neo-Nazi sympathiser? Gone, if not forgotten.
So you're happy to have to keep your lip buttoned occasionally?
Well, there's another theme in politics that gets a bit lost, which is that actually we do seek to find the common ground. So yes, I'm constrained, but I embrace that constraint because it's in our national interest.
And if Trump wasn't unpredictable enough, Joe Biden's announced he's dropping out of the race for the White House.
I think Joe Biden has done an incredible job. He put the United States at the center of the climate emergency. And I think that the way that he has gone about standing with Zelensky in the face of the war in Ukraine is really, really, really important. So I think history would judge Joe Biden pretty well.
The power of this new government feels massive, and you can feel it in the air, whether you're under the gilded ceilings here in the Foreign Office or whether you're walking down Whitehall. But the reality is there are so many things that they cannot control, whether that's what happens in the Middle East, whether what happens in energy prices. And they've promised us to bring back stability time and time again. That's not just about what they do, it's about what happens in other parts of the world.
The conflict in the Middle East has already been brought close to home for Labour. 4 independent candidates who fought the election over Gaza beat them and won seats in the House of Commons. Some big names nearly lost out too.
Liang Mohammed, Independent, 15,119. Silence. West Streeting, Labour Party, 15,647.
The now Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, only kept his job by 500 votes. His support crashed by 10,000 compared to last time round.
People exercised their democratic right, which was to give me a kicking at the ballot box. And I have to take that criticism on the chin, work to rebuild trust. And I think Labour actually is in a much better position now on Gaza than we were in the early stages of conflict. But you've got to take, when voters send you a message, you've got to take it on the chin and listen.
The leadership's support for Israel's been a running sore for some in Labour ranks. MPs worry not just about how to handle the subject, but how brutal the campaigning became. The police are even investigating in some places.
There's been huge disquiet among Labour members, among many Labour MPs about the position that you and Keir Starmer have taken on Gaza.
I think that MPs feel what some of their constituents feel, which is a lack of agency. They want this to end, and I recognise that, I understand that. I knocked on enough doors in my own constituency and others to know that. The truth is, it's horrific. It's the toughest of international problems, but clearly it's one that I'm going to be giving a lion's share of my effort to bringing about the ceasefire, because that's what we need.
For most voters, they'll judge Labour next time on what they do closer to home. Wes Streeting wants to remake the NHS, but without huge dollops of cash.
Good morning.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming in and for dialing in on the screen.
With more than 6 million people on waiting lists in England alone, the job for him and his new officials is enormous.
Fundamentally, this is about people who are waiting in pain and agony and are desperate for care.
92% of patients in England are meant to be treated within 18 weeks of being referred, but that target's not been met for more than 8 years.
When can people expect things to feel better when it comes to the healthcare they get?
Well, certainly within the first year of a Labour government, I think people will see that we've been keeping our promises. And I set very challenging objectives for the end of the first term of the Labour government to restore NHS waiting time standards to where they should be, the standards the NHS sets for itself.
But victory in this election gives Labour 5 years tops.
Getting those waiting lists of the NHS down is going to take quite a long time. The last Labour government, it took them 7 years to get to nobody waiting more than 18 weeks. And that cost them an enormous amount of money, much more money than this government is likely to have.
And there's no answer yet on one of the toughest problems of all, how we care for those who need it most. You might have to wait 10 years for that solution.
And in terms of the longer-term challenges, particularly social care, will a Labour government have an answer to the problems of social care by the end of this first term?
Yes, because I think in terms of our ambition to build a national care service over the course of a decade, that does require a serious 10-year plan. So there will be things that we can improve much sooner. But if you're serious about doing something like a national care service, you have to build the right long-term plan and you have to build the right politics around it.
For union leaders who want this new government to work, it's not credible to say you can heal the sick health service without extra piles of cash. Not just for the NHS, but its staff as well.
I think it's fanciful for us to be in a situation of saying that the NHS doesn't need more money. We are going to have to deal with the issue around staff and the payment of staff in the NHS. It's a critical issue. It's coming down the road very fast. If we don't resolve the NHS pay, then we cannot resolve the NHS.
The government's hinted an above-inflation pay rise may be on the cards for some NHS workers and is meeting junior doctors about pay this week. They've made history already.
The King commands this honourable House.
All the glitter and gold of the first King's speech of a Labour government in 14 years. The horse and carriage takes the monarch to Parliament to present the government's list of their plans.
My government's legislative programme will be mission-led and based upon the principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all. Stability will be the cornerstone of my government's economic policy.
The pomp isn't the point. Parliament plays dress-up, so you can see it's a special day when the government's promises are made official and inked in.
My ministers will get Britain building, including through planning reform, as they seek to accelerate the delivery of high-quality infrastructure and housing.
There are no fewer than 40 new bills, the most in nearly 20 years. The government's about to play a bigger role in all our lives, moving when support from the public is still fresh. Ministers watching on know full well it might not last.
I'm worried that if we don't get this right, future generations will curse us. And that is why, in opposition, we did a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the serious work to be ready for this moment. And I've hit the ground running at 100 miles an hour. I'm just determined, having worked so hard to get Labour into government, that we don't waste a minute, that we don't waste a second.
In truth, the new government's taking a gamble. The hope of getting the economy growing has no guarantee. And if it doesn't happen, the Chancellor's every choice, every calculation, decisions on our behalf get harder to take. And the promises Labour made, harder to keep.
Rachel Reeves is going to face really tough choices. She's either going to have to accept that some areas of public spending are going to be cut, or at best not going to be increased, or she's going to have to decide, well, I want some more funding for those public services. One is, let's raise taxes. Well, she's ruled out most of the big potential tax raising measures. So that's going to be tough. It may also have negative consequences for growth.
And there won't be much patience from the left if Labour doesn't spend.
We cannot go through 5 years of semi-austerity or 5 years where there's going to be cuts. What we have to do now is we have to borrow to invest so that we can begin to build the industries that we need.
Isn't it highly likely that if growth doesn't get you going as you expect, that you're going to have to put up some form of taxes?
See, I'm just not willing to accept that growth is going to be impossible, that we can't deliver on that central mission of this incoming Labour government. I know that there's no lever that I'm going to be able to pull in this building or the Treasury, a couple of buildings down the road, that is magically going to grow the economy. I recognise that. What we need to do is create the circumstances in which businesses are willing to put their money in Britain, to invest in Britain, to create wealth, prosperity and jobs here in Britain. And that's what the plans that I've set out do.
Many independent economists look at the state of the public finances and say, you know what, whatever Rachel Reeves says now, she's going to either have to find taxes to rise or she's going to have to cut public services. And that's the reality that you face.
We have to deliver growth, otherwise we are going to be stuck in this doom loop of low growth, high taxes, declining living standards, public services that are not good enough, and we've got to break out of that. And the only way to break out of that is through economic growth.
Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister for just over a fortnight. But already he and his cabinet are thinking about the next election and where voters might turn if Labour fails to keep its promises.
There is this feeling, you know, politicians are all liars. You know, they say one thing and do another. I'm determined to do things differently because if we don't, it will be seen as sort of an institutional failing that politics, mainstream politics, can't deliver. And there will then be a shift to populists on the left and right. And I want to be different.
We've got to deliver for working people. It's really simple. Working people are crying out for something beyond posture, rhetoric, soundbite, for real change in their lives. They are worried that their children are less well off than they were, and they want action. It strikes me as I sat around the cabinet table that many of us went to state schools. Many of us grew up in working class families. So I think we've got to retain that and really be connected to working people and deliver on their behalf.
I look at the populism that swept Europe, I look at the populism that swept North America, and I look at the state of our own country where there are millions of people out there who have lost all faith and trust in politics and politicians as a force for good. That is not a good place for a democratic society to be. And unless we deliver, people will lose hope and they will turn to the siren voices of populism. So I feel that heavy weight on our shoulders.
In these first few vital weeks, Labour's new ministers have shown their serious intent, and they've tried to show that they have painstakingly prepared. There's been no sense of flash or flamboyance, but a group of people who are deadly serious about cracking on and getting things done. But we shouldn't let that hide the fact this is a government that wants to expand the state. It's an administration that's dependent on getting the economy to grow. And it's a cabinet that doesn't yet have all the answers to many of the really big problems that the country faces. And remember, prime ministers aren't just defined by the things that they would like to happen. In the end, so many of them are defined by what happens to them.
Star of the TV drama that exposed the Horizon scandal, Will Mellor visits victims whose lives were devastated. Surviving the Post Office, next on BBC One.